Good morning, everyone. I think we're probably good to start. Fraser, are you ready?
I am ready, yes.
Excellent. Let's get going then. We are recording this session anyway. So just before we start off, a few words of welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today. Today's conversation is all about achieving meaningful engagement in planning and placemaking. We aim to keep those sessions fairly short and as practical as possible. We will therefore be together for about 30 minutes, maybe a little bit more than that. We'll start with a very quick round of introductions, and then I'll hand it over to Fraser for his presentation. There will be time for a Q&A at the end of the session, of course, as well. Just before we kick off, a few housekeeping rules as well. First of all, the session will be recorded. We will share the recording later this week or at the latest early next week with all of those who registered. If you have any questions while Fraser is presenting, you can use the Q&A function. If you can't find it, just use the chat and I'll try to keep an eye on that as well. And then finally, we will address all of those questions at the end of the presentation rather than as we go along. Now, I know I've said this during our previous webinar back in June, but for those of you joining us for the first time, you may still know us as Citizen Lab. In fact, we rebranded on the 4th of June as Go Vocal. It is only but a change in name and visual identity. We are very much still the same team, as you can see. And we offer the same product, which is essentially a one-stop hub for digital engagement that enables you to engage residents in a number of different ways across a number of different topics. Now, one of those topics that councils, which we work with, tend to use the platform for is planning and placemaking. Over the last couple of years, we have been involved a few times with the LUC PropTech Engagement Fund. The latest round, which sort of took place over the summer, enabled us in partnership with Cotswold and West Oxfordshire councils to develop a few additional mapping functionalities to support local planning authorities in the more, let's say, formal stages of the planning process. And this in turn prompted us to organize today's session, introduce those new features, and talk a little bit more about engagement in planning and placemaking. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce my colleague Fraser. For those of you already working with us, you will know him as your government success manager and your main point of contact at Go Vocal, who supports you day in and day out. So Fraser, over to you, and I'll be back, of course, for the Q&A at the end of the session.
Thank you so much, Laura. I must dig out my wonderful Go Vocal background for some reason. I have this nuclear explosion coming out the top of my head. That may well be how you feel when you get to the end of this webinar. Let's wait and see. So what are we going to cover? Well, we're going to talk about planning, placemaking, geospatial, digital engagement, all of those things mixed together. I think this topic is really relevant to anyone who's consulting these days. You don't have to be a planner to be interested in this topic. Place is relevant to, I think, pretty much any consultation that's being run these days. So the theme, as Laura said, is predicated on some recent enhancements we have to our platform, and I'll absolutely talk about that later. We're going to give you some context about maps and why they're useful in consultations. I'm going to give you some examples as well from clients using our platform. I'm going to give you some tips on how to deal with the geospatial data. I'm going to give you a flavor for our new features, and then we've got some Q&A. I'll also stick on the line at the end so that if you've got any one-to-one conversations you want to have with me, I'm happy to embrace those too. So why bother with geospatial consultation? Well, to start, clearly if something's hyperlocal to you, then you're more likely to care. And we've coined a phrase in the UK, NIMBYism, not in my backyard. So clearly there are issues about location which people feel passionate about. We have a variation actually in this country now called a YIMBY, yes, in my backyard. And I think that's going to arise when people realize there might be a cash incentive for having things that are very close to them. We'll see what happens. But also from a local authority's perspective, boundaries, the artificial ones that we draw, they're mostly superficial. And people connect with place more than they do those boundaries. It can be difficult to separate out geography from an issue. So think about, I don't know, closure of libraries or a waste disposal site at the boundary, at a county boundary. It's likely that those facilities are being used by people in another county, maybe rightly or wrongly, but that's the site that they would go to. We've seen this in all kinds of places, including NHS services. So you do have to think beyond your artificial boundaries when you're consulting. Meanwhile, there's new familiarity with maps. We use maps every day on our sat navs, on our phones, so we're not scared by seeing a map anymore. Clearly, for planners, you've got master plans, we've got design codes, house building. Locations really matter, and then those become the subject of the consultation. You can imagine the government now is talking about lots of infrastructure projects on the horizon. I think if it's not going to be pylons, it's going to be sewers. And if it's not sewers and water, it's going to be onshore wind, right? So there's a lot of this type of consultation on the horizon that's coming our way. In fact, there's a nuclear geological facility being built near me. And, I did feel like a NIMBY at the start. But some critical thinking, and you realize that actually it's got to go somewhere, and that it's in my backyard for a reason. But what I see in the community is that now we've got more calls to action on community assets. And the example in this photo here is, you may or not see that. The example is, boards on street furniture telling people that something's happening in a particular location. So I'm going to start with a very non-planning example, a consultation that I got involved with back in 2016 from Calderdale CCG. And this consultation was about the reorganization of NHS assets. In other words, it was about actually losing A&E from one of two sites. There were two hospitals there indicated on that map there. One in Halifax and one in Huddersfield. The hospitals were only 18 miles apart, and this map appeared in the consultation document, right? You can imagine, though, that the arguments were mainly about location. So the public were interested in, what about public transport links? What about the road conditions, particularly at peak times, for ambulances that would have to travel between those places? And indeed, what about the industry location? So in the south of that map, there was a lot of heavy industry, and local people were worried that they'll lose an A&E near heavy industry. It doesn't sound like a good combination, does it? Funny enough, a lot of the respondents to this particular consultation said, well, let's just build a new hospital in between the middle of the two existing ones, an option that wasn't actually considered by the consultants at that time. So maybe if they'd had better ways to capture people's interest in location, they would have captured that in a much more elegant way. Councillors ended up sitting on buses to see how long it took to get between those two places. I think the lessons learned for me were really that maps are very useful as part of an information pack. So even if you're not doing something geospatially, you need to present information in that way. Of course, they could have gone further as well. They could have used maps in the feedback loop. So they could have almost shown people, what the new plans were and how that would relate to all the insights they got about travel times and so on. And the interesting thing about this map, it was a paper consultation. That could have been so much more elegant on the digital channel. So they could have overlaid lots of different layers and had lots of different detail about their proposals without that becoming messy. Now, maps also need to be accurate. So I think they've given a pretty good representation actually in this example, but they don't really show where other facilities are across the border and other border areas. And like I said, that you can't see the major roads, the arteries, all the other detail that that the public really needed to know about this particular consultation. So an interesting case. Now, our ambition here at Go Vocal is to make maps for feedback, not just for information, to embed them in the consultation process, to design them for interaction. So you might ask yourself, well, what are the use cases for that? And I think there are four main use cases on the right-hand side of this slide. Firstly, I think it's helpful for people to find the consultations that are happening nearby. And whilst we don't use maps today in GoVocal for that purpose, we do have location filters, so you can filter down in your area or ward and find those things. Secondly, I think it's useful to use maps for providing geospatial insights. So collecting information like, what's this place like? What route do you take to school? And building up a pattern of behavior from citizens. I think that's really essential, perhaps, in those early stages of consultation where you're trying to understand people's priorities and preferences. Thirdly, I think there's is definitely a case for planning. You know, how about a call for sites? So planners have a very specific need for use of maps. And then I think finally, and this kind of alludes to the previous case, which is showing impacts. It might be that you want to display a flood risk area as a layer, and you can get quite creative with that. So you could have, you know, again, maps over time, before, now, proposed, future. We see a lot of that when we think about climate change and impact. Now, this, you know, use of maps does, of course, come with challenges and opportunities. I've got some on the left-hand side of that slide there. Not least that planners love paper. I'm sure they will fall out of love with paper eventually. So on the opportunities, we have data sets, you know, maps that are ready to go. Lots of people producing those, and you can reuse them. Thankfully, we have a wonderful connector in our platform called Esri, and that means that you can use maps that are being published by other people, but also within your own organization. I'll talk about that a bit later. The challenges are that I think GIS expertise tends to be locked away within our organizations. You know, it's seen as a bit of a dark art, with people talking almost in engineering terms about mapping. There are also concerns about accessibility and how people interact with maps. I think that there's some genuine concerns there, but again, we've come a long way in making sure that everything's accessible. And then there comes, you know, the point about analyzing the feedback you get, the geospatial feedback, that requires special attention too. So it's not without a bit of strain. Now, we have some nice examples in our platform of map-based consultations that our clients are already running, and that's because we already have this built-in mapping feature where you can present a map and allow people to drop a pin on it, for example, and see other people's contributions. Our clients love that, and I think that visual identity to projects really spices things up. So the two examples I have are on screen. On the left, we have something from Shaping Salford, our friends in Salford City Council. It's a bus routes consultation. People could see the existing bus route, I think, to Media City, and they could comment on the map, and they could identify how it could or should be improved. So a really fairly, you know, simple, straightforward consultation that was trying to optimize bus routes. Something we'd all love to have, I'm sure. The example on the right there is from Lambeth, London Borough of Lambeth, and they have a Safer Streets consultation, which is it's actually an ongoing forever consultation, as far as I understand. So continual engagement. People can report incidents within the borough of antisocial behaviour or violence against women. So it's really aimed at females. It's aimed at you know, making safer streets by through transparency, by promoting and demonstrating that things are happening in the borough. A fascinating read if you click through everyone's contributions and comments. We've just released a new way of using maps in our survey module. I said we'll see that later, and I think that's going to open up a whole new set of possibilities as well. The ArcGIS I mentioned earlier, the Esri integration I mentioned earlier is an option, and basically it means that if you're using ArcGIS or you have maps that are ready to go by those gurus within your organization, then you can just link our platform with your internal system and have those live maps that are pre-made by your experts appear instead of having to recreate them in the platform. So that could save you a lot of time and trouble. So I'm really excited by that too. Okay, so how do we cope with geospatial data? Maybe we don't One of the problems, I guess, is that the data is shrouded by complexity. There are different formats, there are base maps, there are coordinate systems, it goes on and on. And this really is a problem of interoperability. So you might receive a file from someone and they say, oh, it's a shape file. Whereas we only deal here in GoVocal typically with GeoJSON, right? Immediately you can hear the acronyms. So I suppose, thankfully in the UK at least, most local authorities are the master of their data. They tend to maintain a property planning, highways gazetteer, and that comes typically with its own set of experts. So I think you'll find that within your own organizations, there is someone at least who understands that. But I wanted to impart with you some tips. So I want to share with you some free tools outside of GoVocal that I use for my own mapping needs, and which you might want to consider using when you're dealt with a shape file or dealt with the need to import data into our own platform. The first one, and you can just fire up your browser, is geojson.io. And what's neat about this is that you can load in your shapefile or your JSON files, and it will preview that for you on the screen. You might also see in the right-hand column there, you can then edit that. So you can get quite deep into changing the styles of the lines, or maybe editing the coordinates there. So that's great for a sense check. So I typically, if I have a JSON file, I'll load it in here before I load it into our platform, just to make sure it's rendering properly and maybe tweak it. I also put a nice tip at the bottom there. The thing that people tend to miss, and I don't even exactly know where they're going with this, is a standard called WGS84. So if you ever see the option to apply WGS84, click the apply button, because it's going to do you favors, all right? So that's one to try out, and great for experimenting to make sure that your data is in the right shape to go into our platform. The other one is mapshaper.org. Again, I'm pretty sure that's free. It's good for converting between those file types. So if you want to make one to the other, but it's also very good for something called simplifying. What do I mean by simplifying? Well, sometimes you're dealt with a layer which is, say, 5-10 megabytes big, right? It's got lots and lots of sharp detail. Actually, flood risk is a good example of a shapefile which is very accurate. But actually, that accuracy is lost really when it's presented in the way you might want to present it. And our platform, the bigger those layers are, the more and the slower it tends to take to deal with them. So I always think, let's simplify them a bit. And it basically just means reducing that file size, reducing some of the detail, so it's much more malleable. That's a good word, malleable. So try that one out too. Finally, this is a bit of a tip for me. There's Google, right? So if you go to mymaps.google.com, you can actually run in there a search. And the example I think on the screen there is, let's find some hospitals in Sussex. So you can type that directly into into Google Maps, and it will show you the pins. I use this all the time. If I'm going out, I want to find restaurants, say, in an area, or if I want to find a facility, a petrol station or whatever. Once you've done that in Google Maps, you can create a layer by adding those pins to the layer. I think there's a plus button. You can then export that as in a format called KLM. KLM? Yeah, I think so. You can download the file and then convert that to GeoJSON and put it back into our platform. So in other words, there is even a facility for you to be able to create those layers with, a keyword search from Google. Very, very powerful. All right, so I hope that was useful to you. I am going to now look at some of the improvements we've made to our platform to give you a flavor of what's possible now and what's recently been released to our premium customers, help you understand that. So there are 3, I'd say, key improvements. And to access these, you really need to pick up the elements found now in the survey builder. First one is draw a line. So you can present a map and you can ask people about their route, and they can draw that route using a set of pins. And I've got a nice graphic on the next slide. The second one is draw a polygon. So that's basically you're creating a shape on a map. It might be an area of interest, it might be a site, and you can then drag that around and it will appear on the map for submission. The third one is actually upload a shape file. So it's essentially, the reason we put that in there is because some people have, already identified those polygons, and they don't want to, there's an inaccuracy about drawing them, right? And it takes time. So if you imagine you're a developer and there's a call for sites, you can literally just submit your shapefile as a file into that survey question, and that will come to us and we'll do the conversion back to the map. And something else, I'll come on to that on the next slide about the formatting of our questions. I guess the other thing to say is, we also have some kind of geospatial element to methods like document annotation, like Conveyo. So within a PDF today, you can embed that in a project if you're using Conveyo, and you can have elements where people can click on a section, on a set of words. They could see a map. They could even see a 3D map, right? So there are lots of opportunities for us to embed maps into consultations. All right, you have to watch this GIF maybe a few times over, but the first thing you see here is a new type of page where we can display maps alongside a set of questions. So that's really neat. The second one here is simply dropping a pin. That's something you could have done before in ideation. This one is drawing a line. So, plotting a route along a road or a path. And you can see this one here is a polygon, and that's jumped very quickly to upload a file. So I'll let you watch that a second time around because it's far too quick for me. Just to let you know that all the mapping data comes back through for analysis and can be found in the AI module. So if you go to someone's individual contribution from that survey, then you'll be able to see what they've done inside there. And there are some lovely aggregated views of all the contributions, like as heat maps as well in the back end, to really help you start to understand or make use of what people have told you in that respect. You could also export that data into another system and manipulate it further if you wanted to. So it's pretty flexible. I'm fairly sure that people are going to find a use for all these wonderful things, and I'm fairly sure that we'll continue to improve on what we've got today. That was it from me. We've lasted pretty much half an hour. I'm impressed. I wasn't even counting, but that gives us some time for some Q&A. I haven't been looking in the chat, but I have been noticing the number increase steadily. I wonder, Laura, is there anything there that you've picked up that people have been asking?
Not too many questions, actually. Just one from Veronica, who would like to know a little bit more about the Lambeth use case and whether we could put the link to the project in the chat. So I'm just looking for that at the moment, and we'll add it in a minute. Can't see too many questions coming in. Let's just give it maybe a couple of minutes, and I'm just going to find this link to the project on Lambeth's site.
Yeah,
share anything else? Yes, Fraser, about this project, Safer Streets. Please go ahead.
Sure, and we will share the slides. I see someone else wrote that in there. I'm probably not the best person to ask about the use case, but certainly from what I've seen, it was exposing the areas in that particular London borough in terms of the issues that were there. And I guess the beauty of the platform is that you can do that anonymously as well. You don't have to put a name against your contribution. I'm not sure whether all of those contributions went back, say, to the police, or whether they were looking at that or doing something about it. But certainly for other people to observe where there were issues of poor lighting or being scared because someone's followed you, that helped other people, take caution and avoid those areas.
I've just popped the link into the chat. A few questions have come up as well. Within that, Veronica, there are a few different projects. So make sure you click on the one with add your input to the map. I think it says something like that. Hopefully that's helpful. Stephanie is just asking to see the GIF again. So if I've just
Okay. Yeah,
because it was
course.
quite fast. We can probably add the slides to the follow-up as well, so that you can go on that, Fraser. I suppose that's not a problem for you if we just include those in the follow-up email to the webinar.
No, not a problem at all. Happy to share any of this content. And I see, actually, I'm just looking, Sarah said there from Lambeth that it's definitely monitored by the community safety team. So rest assured.
Yeah, perfect. Right, a few questions coming in the chat rather than the Q&A. So let me just pick them up. Another Stephanie is asking whether users can add comment pins, lines, and polygons. So wondering if you can go a little bit, I guess, deeper into that without going too technical, but adding questions after those. I'll just let you cover that.
So with our new page type, which basically presents a map alongside questions, the idea is exactly that whilst you can interact with the map and draw a line and polygon, you can also have questions associated with that main question. So absolutely, yes. And you can literally go wild in terms of your design of all the questions that support that map.
Perfect. And then Therese is asking about accessibility within mapping, which obviously is it's quite difficult to achieve. So I don't know, Fraser, if you have more information. Otherwise, Theresa, I can definitely check with our developer who works on accessibility. But if you have any fresh information, Fraser, just go ahead and answer that too.
Well, I'm certainly not an accessibility expert. I know that we conform to WCAG 2.2, and I'm pretty sure that when we looked at implementing these maps, we covered things like the use of keyboard. So you can imagine that there's a reliance there on using your mouse for doing things. I think we went as far as we could, but then equally there are sometimes elements of the map, street names that get very small. You need to magnify in. So yeah, I'm pretty sure we've gone as far as we can on accessibility with maps. I don't know the exact detail, but I know also there are limitations. I know it's not a very helpful answer.
However, you can see on the accessibility statement and when you create projects from the back end, including those kind of surveys with mapping questions, it will give you a little nudge on accessibility. So I'll just look that up for you, Therese, and send it through in a separate email. Perfect. People talking about regeneration projects coming up where they can see this being really helpful. So that's great. Lily is asking about, she says online is great, but what about including people who do not have access to computers and internet? Fraser, wondering if you can say something about blended approaches to engagement here.
Yeah, it is important. And one of the great features I think recently that we've launched is this ability to create a print-ready version of your survey and be able to scan that back into our system, do the handwriting recognition, create the digital record. I'm not sure, I don't think we go as far as maps today with that. Maybe that's something we need to take away with this, Laura, and think about. But yes, we would always encourage a blended approach. As I said earlier, though, the thing with maps is that with the layers that you can get on them and the ability to visually switch on and off those layers, they do allow you to present a lot of complexity without too much mess. Yeah, that's probably as far as I can comment. Other than yes, I do agree that a blended approach is the right approach.
I'm going to go quickly to the next question, which is really interesting, actually. How can residents know if their views are being adopted or considered? How is this used internally in councils to inform the decision-making? Can this connect different parts of council strategic planning? So all around feedback loops, which I know you love, Fraser. So if you want to say a little bit about that based on your experience with our clients, with the councils we work with, go ahead.
It's a holy grail, isn't it, really? And those decision makers need to be well informed. They need to have reports which they dwell on over a period of time. They include all the detail, all the feedback from people. So one danger is that the feedback people are giving is over summarized. I suppose the other thing is that I'd like to see more of is once a decision's been taken, or once the decision makers have sat, that they use maps in those feedback reports. That the feedback reports are not just, we had 100 responses to question 1, that they actually start to provide annexes with all that detail back to people. And then I think from there, it helps that people can see that all of their considerations have been taken into account. Timeliness of those responses is important as well. I'm seeing feedback reports way far in advance, years perhaps after a consultation. That's really depressing. And I guess for me, often the result of a consultation is that a decision maker will come back with option A, option B, whatever. Rarely do I see decision makers come back and say, well, we're going to consult more. I think there's a lot more scope for that. So in short, I'd love to see those feedback reports not just in a written form. I'd like to see them in a video form. I'd like to see them by those decision makers. I'd like to see more maps and deeper insights in those reports.
Perfect. Thank you, Fraser. Stephanie is also asking about how easy it is to use this on phones. And I'll just cover this one quickly to give you a break, Fraser. But all of our sort of resident-facing elements on the platform are built mobile first, actually. We do find that a big percentage of users tend to interact with the platform on a mobile device. So everything which is resident-facing is built mobile first. So this works well on phones. You feel free to try it as well on your platform to set up a project and view it from a mobile phone, and that should help you visualize it. But it should be really nice. We've seen with Fraser the prototypes both of desktop and mobile devices. Fraser, if there's anything you want to add, go ahead.
No, I think seems to be responsive on mobiles, and like you say, it tends to be the way that people are accessing this type of stuff these days. So there shouldn't be too many issues there.
Yeah. A question from Helen about downloading, extracting data to use in their own GIS systems, or can you only do the analysis in GoVocal?
I'm pretty sure that we can download everything, and I've seen examples of this from our product team where they've made some very elegant maps as a result of all the route inputs that someone's made. So yeah, we've got flexibility over all of that.
Perfect. I'm getting lost here with the many questions that are coming up. So let me pick just a couple more up. And I've answered a few in the chat. So I think Renata and Isabel, both of your questions are answered in the chat. We've got another one here about someone who's interested in incorporating more interactive maps in their work, both for visual display and consultation. However, the team is small. They don't have anyone on staff with those skills, but they're interested in using their training budget to increase ArcGIS and mapping skills. They're wondering if there are any resources, tools, training that you would recommend for beginners, Fraser, to just kind of understand data as a non-GIS expert. Is it needed to be able to kind of set up maps on GoVocal? If you could say a quick word about that, that would be great.
Goodness, recommendations for training. I'm not sure I have any. I apologize. It's not something I've ever looked for, and I think that's a good sign, because actually I felt that the built-in mapping features, if you don't even touch the kind of integration with ArcGIS, are intuitive enough for you to get going. The only difficulty is like manipulating these JSON files, and I gave you some tips in the presentation about how to do that. So my gut feeling is actually that you can get going pretty easily by yourself, just doing a few Google searches and just trying things out with the platform using our native mapping tool. If you wanted to go further, the only thing I could think of is if you're in a local authority, I'm not sure you are, speak to someone in highways, because they have a really great grasp of mapping. And if you're lucky enough to have someone in highways, they will inevitably impart loads of information and be able to signpost you to a decent training course.
Yeah. I mean, I've been able to set up some maps on the system without being an ArcGIS expert at all. So there's some things, I guess, that you can do without too much training, but yeah, also not an expert, so wouldn't be able to advise on any tools to up those skills. Just one more question that I'm seeing around, is there a way to show residents, people, how they can use those tools, any kind of GIFs, video examples? What's interesting in this kind of GIF that is happening right now as we're talking is right now you can see kind of in the bottom left corner of the map, it's going very quickly, but there is a little kind of hand showing you what to do. So we've tried to make these tools as user-friendly as possible, showing the user what to do, because you're right that not unless you're kind of engaging specialized stakeholders, not everyone knows how to use a map and how to kind of annotate it, to draw a polygon line on it. So hopefully these little prompts help those less specialized audiences, I guess, to interact with the maps as well. Fraser, I don't think there's anything else that you would add to that, but if there is, please go ahead. And I'm just going to see if there are any other questions coming up.
No, exactly what I was going to say. We have thought about that by using those animations. I think that'll go some way. And yeah, prompts in the question themselves, click and then click again. Maybe you could link to a custom page. That might be helpful, or have some instructions on a page before this page. I do think there's a lot of familiarity with maps these days. I think the barriers there are relatively small, but it will be interesting to see how people cope if they do have any problems.
Yeah. And then, of course, we do have use cases on the blog if you're more interested in the kind of use case and show how it's used. We do have a few blogs, a few posts on the blog. If you just filter through urban planning, you will find those. There is a guide as well on our blog about, which is specifically about local planning, so less so around other projects that may require mapping or could use mapping as a way to engage, but those could be useful. So Kate, as you're asking those questions, do feel free to check those out. Indeed, we can probably, in our follow-up, also share a link to a platform where you can actually test this GIF that you're seeing at the moment as a user. So we'll just put that in the follow-up of the webinar as well. Thanks, Joe. Lovely. I think that's it. I can't see any more questions. There've been some really great ones. So thank you everyone for making this more interactive and so interesting. If there are any questions that I've missed that we didn't answer, please do feel free to email us. We'll be happy to take those up with Fraser. Otherwise, as I said at the beginning of the webinar, we will be following up later this week or at the latest next week with the recording of the webinar, the few resources that we mentioned. And I think that's it from us. So Fraser, ready to wrap up?
Yeah, thanks so much for your attention, everyone. I can see that we've also got some people helping other people out in the chat, which is lovely to see. Please do join us for the next one. Not sure what it's going to be yet, Laura, but I'm excited that you've all joined us, and stay tuned.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day.